gavel.
Okay, we're going to call the budget meeting to order at 6:02, and I guess we'll begin with roll call.
Mrs. Melendi?
Here.
Mr. Gentry?
Here.
Mr. Drizal? Mr. Guerin? Mr. Troy?
Here.
Mr. Fleck?
Here.
Mr. Quagliano?
Okay, we have a quorum, so we will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance, and we're going to have Ms. Masajewski come up with her students, if they can introduce themselves.
All right, I'm here with a group of new to fifth graders. We're going to have you come up and just say your name in the microphone.
Ava, Jack, Shannon, Kaylee,
Ashton,
Have you guys come on up?
Mona, you can come up here.
Put on the green light means that the
There you go.
oh yes.
Well, that's up to you.
All right, well, now that the paparazzi's done, we got some questions for you guys. First of all, welcome. Thanks for leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance. You guys are, did I hear you're all fifth graders? Yeah. So you're like at the top rung in your school now? So, okay. Why don't we just go down the list, and I just wanted to ask you, what is your favorite class so far?
fifth grade,
What subject, I mean?
art and math.
Art and math?
Probably reading.
Reading, okay.
I like science.
Good.
Math and PE.
Okay.
I like writing and science.
Writing and science, okay. So, what do you think is going to be the biggest challenge for you this school year?
Maybe, I don't know,
Okay.
not talking.
I like that answer a lot.
That's your chance.
Yeah.
Maybe talking more because I don't really answer some of the questions. So.
Okay.
Less talking out loud.
Let's talk.
Like getting good grades and I don't know, just pretty much getting back used to the school, pretty much.
Okay, very good. How many of you are new to the school this year? Any of you? You guys? Okay, so you've been around. You know the ropes. You know how to get around here. Do you have any questions for us? Do you even know who we are and why we're here?
Oh, no.
Okay.
No.
Well, neither do I. No, no. We're the school board, and what we do is we kind of help set policy and figure out how to spend the money that we have for the school so you guys could have the best educational experience that you possibly can. And we're here to kind of listen to what people are, what their concerns are, and we help address them and give all the staff and everybody that works there what they need so that they can do the best job. Okay? Well, thanks for coming up. We really appreciate it. And if you want to stick around for the budget hearing, that would be awesome. Okay, thanks. Oh, yeah, should we get a...
You can do a picture. We'll have you come and we're going to get a picture. You can come right up. Front.
Yeah.
To work on that.
Yeah, she told me about that too.
Should we pull the chairs away?
Okay, you all stand right up against the table.
Stand by. You guys did a great job.
They're going to think I'm one of the fifth graders.
They are. I was going to say that, but
I'm not in fifth grade.
Yep.
Okay, everybody look at me first.
That would be Mr. Armstrong, and he actually has
His camera looks like
he
his
actually
shirt.
has a camera. It looks like he does.
No, it's weird.
How do you do that?
He matches his camera to his shirt. We actually bought him this really nice camera, and he uses his phone. Mr. Armstrong, for you.
I'm trying to look at everyone, and it's.
I know.
No, see, that's what the famous people go
There you
through.
go.
Now what you do is you tell me to charge him for the next picture.
Yeah, exactly.
Or anyone else
Thanks
doesn't.
again.
Thank you
Thanks
guys
again.
very much.
Good
For
job.
having us.
Okay. Have a great school year. I have a new appreciation for what Mr. Drizal does every meeting. I'll come with prepared questions next time. Okay, next on the agenda is the actual budget hearing. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Altmeyer.
Well, thank you very much. At your place, everybody has a copy of the FY18 budget. And below the copy of the budget, I have also provided a PowerPoint, which I'm going to throw up onto the screen. Because before I get into the budget, I did want to talk about a few things. First, you know, since we passed the tentative budget in July, and we started looking at the budget in June, a few very good things have happened within the state of Illinois. The very first thing that happened was obviously the state passed a budget. First time in 2.5 years, after 2.5 years of legislative gridlock, we were able to get something done, and it was actually a very good budget in terms of education. All right, legislators set $350 million of additional dollars aside towards education, as well as $65 million for the transportation side of education. A little history on the transportation, the give back of $65 million, if you recall, back in 2009-10 timeframe, the state of Illinois cut the transportation claim budget by about 40%. So the 65 is a partial give back of that 40% cut back in the 2009-10 timeframe. So that's the very first thing. The very first good thing that happened. Second thing was obviously the legislators passed Senate Bill 1947, and that's kind of what I'm going to throw up on the screen here in a second. The evidence-based funding model, which by itself is a major, major victory for Illinois school districts and the students of Illinois. It's going to bring districts, especially those downstate districts that have been suffering and in need of funding, additional funding for years, a little more closer to adequacy. Right? So this evidence-based funding model will be replacing the general state aid claim, as well as two of our categoricals, a bilingual, as well as a summer school claim. So with that, Dan, if you could throw this up, I think, you know, the evidence-based funding formula, the new evidence-based funding formula, will be a significant portion of the FY18 budget. And moving forward, year after year, it will continue to be a major piece of our budget. So I just want to make sure that the community, the staff, and the board here understand a little bit about right? How is it being calculated? What is an adequacy target? So I wanted to walk the board through that. So getting to the first slide, I think the very first question is, what is adequacy, right? Oh, no, that's actually the second slide, but let's go to the first slide, Dan. The highlights of Senate Bill 1947. If you notice, the 947 is kind of shaded out on the PowerPoint, and it's shaded out because Senate Bill 1, 1947 actually, is about 99% of Senate Bill 1, right? There weren't too many changes to Senate Bill 1, but the highlights that I really want to point out are kind of as follows, right? The new formula is tied to an evidence-based best practices. Something to consider when we go through the calculation on the next slide. Each school district is treated individually. The greater the student need for that district, the higher the adequacy target. And the higher the adequacy target and the lower the adequacy, the distance from adequacy, the more funding that district will receive. Which brings us to the next point. The new dollars go to the neediest districts first, which was obviously not the case with the general state aid claim. No district loses money, and the starting point is the amount of funding that the district has had. The slide notices this year, but it was actually the past year, FY17. And when we get into the calculation, right, that's called the base funding minimum, okay, which includes prior year's general state aid claim, includes prior year's bilingual claim, special ed personnel grant, which was part of the categoricals, special ed funding for children, which was also part of the categoricals, and special ed summer school. That total for prior year is $24.9 million. So what that means is, regardless of what the general state aid claim ended up being this year as part of the ADA calculation, as part of the available local resource calculation, we are guaranteed that base funding minimum of $24.9 million moving forward. And that's important to note. And it's also very important to note that if you look at a history of our general state aid and you look at a history of our special ed personnel grant, the good news is last year was kind of a high watermark for those claims, which is very, very good for District 158. Also important to note is when you looked at the special ed personnel grant, that's a grant that it's a reimbursement grant, and then we spent a lot of time over the last several years trying to make sure we are maximizing, right, the revenue coming into the state. That was one of those grants that we scrubbed, and we made sure that every vendor, every staff member that had anything to do with special ed, if they were certified and they had special ed kids in their classroom, we made sure that we were claiming those students and those staff members, as part of the special ed personnel grant. Again, that was another grant that was a high watermark for us. Good news, we get to carry that forward. So districts that didn't do that, obviously, aren't receiving the benefit of that base funding minimum. Next slide. Now let's talk about the adequacy target, okay? Adequacy target under the evidence-based model is the estimated cost a district would need to essentially educate the students in that district, okay? So the first calculation as part of the base funding model is this. Step one, the funding formula has identified 27 essential elements for educating a student, and the estimated cost of those elements, such as technology, nurses, counselors, optimal class size, up-to-date materials, professional development, full-day kindergarten, reading interventionists, student activities, teachers, etc. So there's an initial cost that was estimated by the team on the 27 essential cost elements. Those elements were then multiplied by a district's enrollment, right? By their number of special ed students, by the number of ELL learners, to ultimately arrive at a number that is then salary and regionally base adjusted to arrive at an adequacy target. So step three, just so you understand, step three is, right, salaries are different based on where you're located in the state, right? Chicago salaries are different than salaries in the western suburbs versus salaries downstate Illinois. So as part of the calculation, those costs that are accumulated, the product of 1 and 2, are then essentially salary and regionalized and adjusted so that we're looking at apples to apples throughout the state. That then arrives at the adequacy target. Next slide. Once we have an adequacy target, we need to understand the other funding mechanisms that are being looked at. And the very first mechanism is the local capacity. I think we all understand what local capacity is. That is our EAV base. That is our property taxes that we bring in. So every district in the state of Illinois there's a calculation to arrive at local capacity. The local capacity plus that base funding minimum that we talked about, last year's state funding on those grants, the GSA, the two categoricals, the bilingual, and the special ed summer school, equals the base funding. And the difference between the adequacy target and those two are the gap to adequacy. So in this example, right, if the adequacy target was deemed to be $12,000 and the district is receiving $4,000 and $5,000 in state funding and local capacity, that difference represents a 25% gap. And so their gap to adequacy, or their adequacy target, obviously, they are currently at 75% of adequacy. And based on that 75% of adequacy, that is what determines the payout moving forward. Just a side note, 80% of the districts in Illinois are significantly under, obviously, that adequacy target. 20%, though, are near adequacy or above adequacy. I thought it would have been a little higher, but it's or a little lower, but it's not. The formula then distributes the new dollars. So we talked about the state assigning $350 million additional dollars, right, towards education, and they're going to target, or they're going to use that $350 million to assign dollars to different tiers as part of the adequacy target range. So for instance, 50%, and this is part of the formula, 50% of those new dollars, $175 million, will go to the least well-funded districts in the state. Typically, those that are at only 50% of adequacy or less, and there's quite a few Tier 1 districts. Okay? Any district that is at 50% to 90% is considered inadequately funded, and they receive actually the remaining 49%. So 50% of the $350 million go to Tier 1, 49% of the $350 million go to Tier 2, only 1% go to anybody who's 90% or above, in other words, very close to adequacy or above adequacy. And just as a side note, if you are above adequacy, as part of that 1%, I think they threw these districts a bone. 1/10 of 1%, 0.1% will go to a district if they are above 100% of adequacy. So if you're a Lake County district and you're spending $18,000 to $20,000 per student, well, they're going to have to split $350,000 between any district that is above adequacy. Okay, so that's kind of how the formula works, and it's important to note that, well, you want to be in Tier 1 or Tier 2 if you're looking for additional funding for your district. And fortunately, based on the Senate Bill 1, the initial formula that came out back in June, District 158 is at 65% of adequacy, which is no surprise, being the lowest operating cost district in the western suburbs for a K through 12 school or district. We are at 65% adequacy, which means we are part of that 49% group, and we will be receiving a portion of the $175 million, that a little less than that is being divided amongst Tier 2 districts. We estimate that cost, again, based on Senate Bill 1's initial preliminary work, to be somewhere between $600,000 to $800,000. For the budget that we are about to look at, we have put in an additional $600,000 into the budget as a placeholder, because that calculation, that complex calculation of the 27 different cost elements multiplied by the key enrollment figures and whatnot, that has yet to be completed by ISB. That may not be completed by ISB for 4 to 6 weeks. I mean, they may complete it sooner, but they're going to be scrubbing that data for the next 4 to 6 weeks to make sure, to absolutely make sure it's ready for prime time, because they do not want to leave any district, right? They don't want to make a mistake on that, especially being the first year out. Because of that, some of the numbers we have in the budget are estimates, and I am anticipating having a amended budget in the November-December timeframe for the board to approve. So we will go through this process again. It'll be much less painful, I promise. But I did want to bring the board up to speed on the evidence-based funding model, because it is a critical piece of the funding moving forward. 80% of our state funding, 80% of our state funding will be coming from the evidence-based model. Under general state aid, 70% of our funding was from general state aid. But because this is including 2 previous categoricals, it upped it to about 80%. Our total state funding is about 30% of our total budget. We expect to be at about $30 million this year on a $100 million budget. Okay. Any questions on this new funding formula?
Yeah, I do. And I'm probably putting the cart way in front of the horse on here. How does this, how do they foresee this fluctuating now that this has got some concrete on it? If you're in this level of adequacy, is there, how possible is it to move up and down so that you can look ahead and know what kind of fluctuation you might have year to year or 2 years out when you're putting together a 5-year plan?
Well, I think that's a very good question, and it all depends how much the state year after year puts in to the formula. Right? This year they put $350 million into the formula. You have to remember, this is not a formula that is going to get everybody to adequacy year one. This is a 10-year, 15-year. Yeah, it may never happen.
Well, because the adequacy target will change.
Yeah, the adequacy target will change, but the $350 million, I think, is estimated to only bring everybody up about 5%.
Okay.
So districts that are at 50%, they might go to 60%, 65%, but on average, the movement would be 5% across the board.
Okay.
Because there are it's billions of dollars. What is
about
needed.
$8 billion?
Yeah, to bring districts up to 100% adequacy. But this is a great start because
Yeah,
districts who are in dire need of funding are going to receive that funding.
Unquestionably, yeah.
Yeah.
I think the big thing to remember is, while it sounds good, and it is good comparatively for us than being bad, but the state's still broke. And so you have to keep it in that backdrop, is that there's a real, I mean, the state could come in next year and say we have to cut overall education spending, so there's actually less money going in, and I think those real possibilities continue to exist in the future. But that being said, yeah, we're definitely a lot better in Group 2 than Group 4. So.
Correct.
So just to follow up on that point is, if you do have a situation where funding is cut by greater than $350 million, is there any contemplation in the language to how that works?
That would then come out of the base funding minimum of every district prorated back.
Okay.
Yeah, so I am aware of that. Hopefully that doesn't happen. I don't mean to look at you, sorry, Leslie. I know you're not. Yeah.
We want you to be.
But really, nobody is more excited that this went through than I am, because looking at the general state aid formula for the next 5 years with home values increasing and EAV increasing, our general state aid was going to fall significantly. 20 to 25% over the next 5 years. With this new formula, with the base funding minimum, and that'll go up and down, but that's pretty much guaranteed for the next several years that will not go down. And because of the formula, we are guaranteed to continue to receive that funding, which we will need, obviously. An artificial decrease in the general state aid payment to the district because home values are going up just does not make sense, especially for a district that is only at one of the lowest operating cost per pupil districts in the state. So this is a great thing for all of Illinois, but definitely the community, the students, and District 158 in particular. Okay. All right. With that, you have your budget in front of you. And because this budget actually changed very little from what was presented at the July meeting, I'll try to get through this fairly quickly at a very high level. So in front of you, you have the budget document. The budget document includes an overall narrative of the budget as well as supporting schedules by fund, in the aggregate, as well as the operating funds, as well as numerous charts and graphs, right, outlining the budget from a visual perspective. So as you go through that, you'll see that. Very similar to what we presented in July, although there are no out years. So what you have here is just historical information plus the FY18 budget number, okay? Very similar to prior year, this is a very, very solid budget. You know, we did quite a bit of work in FY17, and with this budget, the FY18 budget, we will continue that path and the strategic direction of the district moving forward, right? This budget currently reflects and includes funds to cover the replacement of devices associated with the one-to-one program. It covers additional headcount as a result of increased enrollment and needs, right? It covers ongoing maintenance projects in line with our deferred maintenance plan, which Mr. Rinkosik is going to cover tonight. I'm looking forward to that. It covers technology infrastructure upgrades and replacement, as well as the continued practice of setting aside funds for reserve for replacement, and we'll get into some of those details here in a second. Okay, the FY18 proposed budget reflects an operating surplus at a very high level of $110,000, so it's a balanced budget. Material assumptions include, from a revenue standpoint, CPI at 0.7% and new construction at $45.8 million for the 2016 levy is locked and loaded, so that is a known, obviously, known numbers. The CPI for the 2017 levy is also known at 2.1%. That has been reflected in this budget. And a new construction estimate of $18 million has been made for this budget. State funding overall is up $471,000. So if you're looking at the details, state revenues are up $471,000 from prior year, largely due to the administration's estimate, the $600,000 estimate of the increase in the evidence-based funding model. Expenditure assumptions, please note that salaries and benefits are now at 75% of the FY18 proposed budget. So all salaries reflect the current collective bargaining agreements. Non-union salaries follow HESPA, as they have always done in prior years. Health insurance, it's important to note, health insurance is budgeted to remain flat with prior year at $8.8 million. Administration feels the amount budgeted for FY17 will cover the FY18 estimated expenses. Operating revenues are budgeted. We are officially a $100 million organization, budgeted at $100.9 million, increasing approximately $3.12 million or 3.2%, driven primarily by the increase in levy dollars due to new construction, as I talked about earlier, of $2.5 million, and an increase in state revenues, $500,000, as a result of the initial estimated increase associated with the evidence-based funding model. Operating expenditures are budgeted at $100.8 million, an estimated increase in expenses of $3.2 million, or 3.33% versus prior year. That is primarily driven by the increase in salaries, benefits, purchase services, and capital outlay. Looking at each one of those independently, 72% of the overall increase in operating expenses is driven by an increase in salaries and benefits, which makes sense actually, of $2.4 million, primarily due to the salary increases in accordance with the collective bargaining agreements. Purchase services, we had numerous things driving that increase $530,000, driven by several large items such as a curriculum general purchase services for learning support systems, the contract custodial budget for our contract custodial vendor, a full year for the alternative school budget, security purchase services, as well as an estimated increase in banking and merchant service fees as we continue to see more people go online with RevTrack and use credit cards, which is also a very good thing for the district. Capital outlay is budgeted to increase approximately $350,000 from FY17, primarily due to an increase in bus purchases. So you will see a bus purchase budget line item of $1.1 million. If you remember, we purchased 14 buses last year, and it was $1.1 million. We will again need to probably purchase in the range of 13 to 15 buses this year for $1.1 million. It's a budget variance because that amount was not budgeted in prior year. Okay. The offset to that $1.1 million is a $600,000 decrease in the reserve for replacement. So last year, the reserve for replacement was budgeted at $1.1 million. This year, in the current budget that you have in front of you, the reserve for replacement is budgeted at $500,000. So those restricted dollars at the end of FY18 will have accumulated to approximately $7 million, which is good, because after I think we hear Mr. Rankosik's update today, we may need that in the future. So I think it's fiscally responsible to continue to do that. As a result, the FY18 proposed budget reflects a balanced budget with $110,428 surplus. As such, administration recommends the Board of Education approve the fiscal year 2018 proposed budget. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Anyone? Anyone? Bueller?
Bueller? So funny.
All right, with that, item number 4, public comments. I think that puts the burden on one person in the crowd. No public comments? All right, I'll make a motion to adjourn our budget hearing at 6:32 p.m.
Second.
Motion and a second for Mr. Troy. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? All right, that takes us on to our special meeting. I'd like to call to order the special meeting for Thursday, September 7th at 6:33 p.m. Can I have roll call, please?
Mr. Gentry?
Here.
Mr. Guerin? Mr. Troy?
Here.
Mr. Quagliano?
Here.
Mrs. Melendi?
Here.
Mr. Drizel?
Here.
Mr. Fleck?
Here.
All right, public comments, another chance for public comments? Just in case you changed your mind from 2 minutes ago? No? All right, I'd like to make a motion to approve the fiscal year 18 budget as presented in the budget hearing.
Second.
I have a motion and a second for Mr. Troy. Any questions, comments? Can I have roll call, please?
Mr. Quagliano?
Yes.
Mr. Fleck?
Yes.
Mrs. Melendi?
Yes.
Mr. Guerin? Mr. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Troy?
Yes.
Mr. Drizel?
Yes. All right, motion carries, budget passes. Make a motion to adjourn our special meeting at 6:34 p.m.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? All right. For the record, that was a 2-minute meeting. I appreciate everybody's patience for that. And with that, I'd like to call to order the Committee of the Whole for Thursday, September 7th at 6:34 p.m. Can I have roll call, please?
Mr. Guerin? Mr. Drizel?
Here.
Mr. Quagliano?
Here.
Mr. Fleck?
Here.
Mr. Troy?
Here.
Mr. Gentry?
Here.
Mrs. Melendi?
All right. With that, we'll move on to Pledge of Allegiance. Our favorite. You did it already?
We did.
Oh, they were outside. I thought they were waiting for us.
We're efficient. They're done.
Nicely done, then. We can do it again if you feel patriotic. Another public comment. Hey, we're on a roll. Third time the charm. All right. All right. Revision and adoption of the agenda. I'll make a motion to adopt the agenda as presented.
I have a removal.
You have a removal.
I do have a removal.
I rescind my motion then.
Item 5.5, please.
Remove that?
Yes, please.
Eliminate it or?
Eliminate. Yeah, it's not.
Okay.
It's be next month.
Okay.
Applications have.
No problem. Anyone else before I jump ahead too fast? All right, then I will make a motion to adopt the agenda with the removal of item number 5.5.
Second.
We have a motion and a second from Mr. Troy. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, Dan, let's go on to curriculum. There's no Mr. Guerin, but Mr. Gentry starts with a G, so we'll
All
go
right.
with you.
That will be great with a G. First item up is item 5.1.
Or good
College
enough.
Board contract. Dr. Schlichter.
Yes, so you might recall that last year we implemented for the first time the SAT suite of assessments, and so that meant that our 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th graders were able to partake in the PSAT, which has given us a great data trajectory for those students. And so what we had to do last year, and we're just renewing it at this time, is contract with the College Board to provide those assessments. You see the update summary memo. One piece that I will say is we've learned from ISB that there is a possibility that they will reimburse school districts for one of the administrations. So you'll see all those grade levels on there. We are looking into what the process is for that reimbursement. So it's possible that, for example, we may say, oh, grade 10 we would get reimbursed for, but we do need to contract with the College Board in order to get these set and start administering on cycle in the fall here. So just presenting this for the board's approval and then going forward to administer the PSAT. And with that, we'll take any questions.
Okay. Any questions from anyone? Okay, if not, we'll take that forward to the board for approval. Thank you. And next item up is 5.2. Dr. Schlichter, again, the Every Student Succeeds Act.
Okay, thank you. This is just by way of update, and most of you reading in the educational literature or just kind of hearing through the grapevine have heard NCLB, the No Child Left Behind Act, has been replaced. It's been replaced by an act that's being called federally the Every Student Succeeds Act. That's the reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965. So essentially what this means is that our accountability structure is changing. It actually also means a lot of other things. There's some financial impact to it. It impacts our grants, which I have in the upcoming item. But I just felt that this was a really good time to give the board kind of the general overview update of some of the accountability features that would be changing with ESSA. And so essentially, one of the components, and this, as you recall, last year they went on listening tours in the state of Illinois. I think some board members attended, administrators attended. The state of Illinois had to create a plan that would comply with the federal mandate in ESSA. And they went through, I believe, 3 drafts, if not 4. The final draft was actually just approved several days ago, and so this is actually quite timely that we're doing this update because finally we do know that the plan that we're looking at, I think it's about 137 pages long, actually is the plan that has been approved for Illinois. So my purpose here right now is not to go through all the financial implications and everything like that, but just to really look at the accountability piece because you know the e-report card typically comes out in October. Our assessment landscape has been changing pretty drastically. You know, we've added the science assessment, we've switched out SAT for ACT, we've got PARCC in there. We do anticipate that our e-report card is going to look a little bit different this year. We don't know how it will look different exactly, but it's going to reflect this new accountability structure. As you recall, with No Child Left Behind, we were all very concerned with adequate yearly progress, which was meeting that benchmark each year a little bit higher. One of the main areas of focus of the state in trying to meet the ESSA requirements was to say we want a growth-based model. We want something more balanced, and we also want something that recognizes that school districts fail and succeed not just based on a test score. They fail and succeed based on a variety of indicators that work together to show the quality of education for students. So if you look at the attachment to the memo, this is the state actually put this out, sort of a handy little accountability summary. And the part that I would draw your attention to is actually in the second column, the column to the right. In that upper quadrant, there's accountability summary. And so as you see, we have academic indicators that will be included. We also have what they're calling school quality or student success indicators. So about 75% for this year. It's actually going to reduce to 70% for the 18-19 school year. And then 25% for the student success indicators. You'll see that we do have some achievement-based indicators, that first bullet point for using PARCC for the grades 3 through 8, and then using SAT for high school. It's just percent meeting a benchmark. But the majority of emphasis is going to be placed on growth. And so they're using a linear regression statistical model, and they're going to be calculating growth for students. And that's going to be 50% of the academic score. Very, very different than the prior AYP, which basically just said, here's the benchmark, everybody needs to jump over it. So we're looking at how we help students grow. For the first time as well, we are going to be taking into account English learner proficiency using our access scores. That's a test that we already give students by law for our English learners, but this will also factor into accountability now, as well as science. And you notice that this year 0% of the actual rating is based on science. That's because we just still don't have our scores, but they do anticipate that would raise to 5% for the following year. The school quality student success indicators, this is the part that's really quite a bit different. These things were not factored into AYP at all under the old legislation. So chronic absenteeism, that's defined as 10% of days missed for excused or unexcused absences. So we already report absences to the state, but it just means that, and most all this information we already report to the state, it just means they're going to be taking it and doing these calculations and then reporting it back to us in a format that's a little different than what we've seen. The 5 Essentials Climate Survey, which we give, and I think that we've seen that in the report card before, but now it will be factored into an overall summative rating. And then they have some indicators that have not yet been designed, so fine arts, pre-K through 2, and then elementary middle grades indicators. Not designed yet, but the work is still continuing, so we wait with bated breath for those. And then you'll see at the high school level, they are looking at 9th graders on track, which means passing 5 classes and only failing 1 class freshman year, up to 1 class freshman year. College and career ready, which is a variety of indicators having to do with the courses students take, as well as grades and GPA. And then again, the climate survey and fine arts. And so all of these is just kind of a summary to look together at what's going to go into summative ratings. The ratings and designations you'll see at the bottom. So we do anticipate that when our e-report card comes out this year, every school in the state will be rated as either exemplary, commendable, underperforming, or lowest performing. And you can see the descriptions there. One thing that's just of note, and I think it's important, is that under AYP, when we had the No Child Left Behind Act, when a subgroup in a school was performing more poorly than the rest of the students in that school is when the school would be designated failing. They've changed that significantly and in a way that I think is much more equitable and fair. And they've said if a subgroup in a school is performing more poorly than the lowest performing subgroup or the lowest performing group of students in all Title I schools in the state, so in other words, schools that already are receiving funds for challenges, that would then be where that subgroup was underperforming. So in other words, our students are not just being compared to our Huntley students, they're being compared to other struggling students across the state, which I think is a little bit more equitable way to look at how are our at-risk students performing. So really just in terms of an overview, this is what we know. There's a lot underway. This is an implementation year for 17-18. It's also being considered a year of continued development. So this is just by way of an update. I'm happy to answer any questions that I can. I might have to say I'm not quite sure yet about some of these things, but happy to share what I can if anyone has questions.
Any questions? Yeah.
Mr. G. Chairman, I'm late to the table. I actually have a question about the previous topic that I missed.
Okay.
On the SAT. Is there a reason for the increase in the price?
It's actually because last year when we did the contract, we didn't include the 8th graders. We did the 8th graders as a separate add-on later in the year. Okay. And so this year, the 8th grades rolled into the total cost.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. I will be quiet now.
Any other
It's
questions?
related because we have the SAT on this sheet, too. So.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I feel better now.
Yeah.
I feel adequate.
Questions or concerns? Yeah. I'll ask the one I've been trying not to. ELA, acronym.
English Language Arts.
Gotcha.
Yep.
That's what I thought. Yeah, I knew that. Thank you.
Yeah, we're the kings and queens of acronyms, right? So looking at this sheet, I think none of those are off target to ask the question. DLM is for our severely cognitively disabled students. It's the dynamic learning maps.
Okay.
In case you were wondering about that one too.
So I have a question, if I can.
Sure.
as this thing continues to roll out, because there are pieces that are undefined at this point, and like it shows on this document, is there an expectancy where schools will change tiers as these new components roll out? Or is there an expectation that not just on how a school progresses or achieves, but that the new components will impact the dynamic itself?
I think the expectation is that the schools would receive a summative designation each year based on that year.
Okay.
So, we would receive, if you look at those descriptors for exemplary school, for example, if we meet those this year, that would be our tier for this year. I also would assume probably in the online report card they have some nice little graphic with a color or something like that to show. And then next year we would have our data and we would be then rated for next year.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, thank you. Next item up on the agenda is item 5.3, Title I Plan.
And there's a reason this one came after the last one, which is that one of the changes in ESSA, actually, some of the very concrete changes in ESSA have to do with the grant management system. So in prior years, really as long as I can remember, we've gotten what we called the NCLB block grants. So Title I for at-risk and low-income students, Title II for teacher quality and retention. Typically it's used for professional development. Back several years ago, we used to get Title IV, which was called the safety grant. Those weren't competitive grants. You would receive from the state, this is your allocation, but you'd still have to fill out an application, turn it in. It was really never something that we made a big discussion of at the board level because it was just an internal process. One of the things that ESSA has put into place is that for the purpose of Title I, they would want there to be sort of a larger plan and discussion and transparency at the board level to share with the community what it's being used for. So for the very first time, we are being required to complete what you see is a pretty extensive Title I plan that is approved by the board and submitted to the state. Then it's on file along with the Title I grant, which is what we always had to submit in the past. And so it's really nothing in the plan that's earth-shaking. I think we've had a really solid grant management system. Our Title I funds have gone to support RTI. They've gone to support, and our schools do shift occasionally based on where our low-income students are located in the district. Typically, the high school qualifies. Typically, we have one middle school and maybe a couple of elementary schools that qualify, and that can shift a little bit. But we do use it for intervention services. We use it for some teacher training occasionally. And so this plan that we have in front of you is really, I think, a good extension of that quality programming. It's just that we were never required to do a plan before for board approval. Now we are. So we're bringing that to you for approval. It would be then submitted after it's approved at the end of September or the second meeting. We would submit it to the state. They'd keep it on file with our grant application. And so that's essentially in a nutshell. One thing I would note, and you can see I just put for interest's sake, the actual amounts that we've been granted in Title I, Title II, and Title IV over the past several years. Title I has continued to go down a bit. One of the great mysteries with this is that everybody said under ESSA we would be seeing reductions in Title II. And as you see, we did not see a reduction in Title II. We saw quite a significant increase, which is great. I double-checked that with the state to make sure it was correct, and they said it was. So Title IV is back, and Title IV can be spent out for safety as well as for looking at equitable programming and diverse programming across the district. So with that, that's just a summary of the plan you see in front of you, and we would just be asking to take that forward for board approval so that we can submit to the state and get our grant application in.
Okay. Any questions? Okay. Yeah, I think it was all kind of laying out what we pretty much do every day, so just putting it in words, so pretty straightforward. Okay, we will move that forward for board approval. And item 5.4 is next, enrollment update. Mr. Ori.
What I prepared for you is the 6-day enrollment, which was on August 30th, Wednesday, August 30th. And I've included last year's enrollment figures just so you can compare and contrast the two. And a couple of things that stick out. One, our high school did breach the 3,000 mark. We're at 3,029. But overall, district-wide, we are down 12 kids. So there's 12 kids less on our 6th day this year than there was last year. The one thing I'd like the board to know that we are doing and we're working very diligently on, and I'm working with Laura and I'm working with registration, is we're rolling up for next year, we're rolling up the grade levels to see what the enrollment will be in each one of the grade levels. To do that and to make sure we have the correct projections, we're doing boundary changes again next year, if you remember, and we need to make sure that these kids, and we've got to check every street, every that's in the situation, every home, count how many kids, and do that sort of thing. So it's quite a detailed process, and we want to make sure our projections are correct. So we are in the process of doing that, and we should have that done relatively shortly and in Dr. Berkey's hands.
Okay. Any questions with the report? Looks like there might be one down there. All right. Thank you very much. And with that, does wrap up then the curriculum committee.
You did such a good job. Why don't you keep going?
And I will take on item 6, which is the HR committee. With first item is 6.1, human resource updates. Mr. Zier.
Just a few updates from the Human Resource Department. Wrapped up the hiring process here for the year. Obviously still hiring positions that come available throughout the year from people resigning or moving on to different careers. We are welcoming also to the district this year 20 PDS students in our elementary and middle schools from Northern Illinois University. They will be participating in a year-long student teaching experience, and they will also be holding their classes over at McCabe Elementary. So we truly have our PDS program on campus. Their professors come to us for those classes, and the students hang around and go to McCabe to get those classes 4 nights a week during the week. Still doing some orientations and some onboarding, and still reviewing enrollment, make sure our staffing levels, working with HEA on that to make sure the staffing levels are where they need to be with contract language concerning class size. We just got done conducting open enrollment with the new insurance plans that came out, so that is done. That information has been put in to be on payroll, and the first paycheck that comes out for that is tomorrow. So we are all set for that. Just to look at September there, as we rolled into the month, a few things that we're continuing to work on throughout the month. And then one more thing I want to note down here at the bottom that will come to the regular board meeting here in September will be the teacher administrator salary report that we do annually. It is due to be posted by October 1st. The reason we don't have it at the COW is because we are still making those last minute adjustments to benefits, adding those onto the salary. So you will have that report for you at the September board meeting, and it'll just be for informational purposes only.
Okay. Any notable, from an open enrollment standpoint, any notable shifts in the distribution across plans that were either expected or not?
No, we haven't had a chance to analyze that quite yet, but we'll take a look at that. Just talking to people who reached out, we did see some shifts from that HMO to the PPO2, where it was a little bit more affordable, but we can dive in to that a little bit more to see if there were a major shift, and then ultimately do a comparison to see if we increased. I would say we have more folks coming on the insurance plan just from phone calls that came to our office. We were seeing people that were not on the plan before but decided to come on. So I can review that data and get back to you to see if there was a significant increase.
Okay. Any other questions with the HR report? Okay, if not, I will turn it over to Mr. Quagliano for the Finance Committee.
Okay, finance 7.1 payables. We have our purchase orders, accounts payable, impress checks, and disbursements. Any questions?
None here.
Concerns from anyone? No. Okay, we'll move those forward. Item 7.2, revenue and expenditures report. Mr. Altmeyer.
Thank you. In front of you, you have the July 2017 financial executive summary, being the first month of the year. Not too much going on in July. Nothing else to really add to the report. Health insurance, we do talk about health insurance each and every month. Solid month, 434,000 in monthly claims. That has trended down over the last several months, so that is actually good to see, because typically the month of July is usually a higher month as our staff is off and they're obviously visiting the doctor and whatnot. So it's good to see that number down. So I think we're starting off the year right on that line item. The third quarter categoricals were received in August, so just again highlight that with the board. We are still waiting for the fourth quarter categoricals to come in, and we're hearing from the comptroller Mendoza down at the state that we should be expecting those hopefully within the next month or two. So we are beginning to see, or we will begin to see they're still calling it the general state aid payment, but that is the base funding minimum. So if you were to go out to the state website, you can actually see our base funding minimum amount noted for every month and what is expected to be dispersed in the next several months. The question is still out there. How are they going to make up the payments they missed? And to this point, they're going to start making those payments, but are they going to increase all future payments to make up for the payments they missed, or are they going to lump sum it? And I don't think that has been determined by the state yet. So that is still in the hands of the comptroller Mendoza. So stay tuned on that. But other than that, obviously, certainly tracking within budget for the month of July.
Good start. Anybody have any questions of Mr. Altmeyer?
Not here.
Okay. We'll move on to 7.3, the revenue contract approval. I believe we have two contracts there, two different vendors. Any questions concerning those two contracts? If not, we'll move those to the board for approval. 7.4, monthly fiscal reports. Mr. Altmeyer.
Nothing to add. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have at this time.
I think the one thing to note, and I found it amazing, is food service about your employee, lack of turnover there.
Yeah,
that's incredible.
Yeah.
I've never heard of such a thing. To have that kind of, what would normally be a transient-ish type of workforce, staying on, and then you got people coming over from other districts, so that's great.
Yeah, I think Mr. Harris and the team do a good job and kind of keeping the staff motivated, and certainly I think just being here at District 158 is a big reason for that as well.
I think you're here, Mark, so that helps too.
No, I think it's the board.
All right, actually all this stuff, all very good, upbeat, positive stuff. So I don't know if anybody else has any comments concerning his memo there. If not, the other report is the activity funds reports. Any questions, concerns there? No. So I'm done. Building and grounds.
All good. Okay. Item 8.1, HVAC preventative maintenance services. Mr. Rincasa, we've turning this over to you frequently here.
We have a service contract that's expiring. We put it back out to bid. We tuned up the contract because we had to add equipment to the schedule of services because of our additional boiler plant and additional boilers in another boiler plant at Huntley High, additional HVAC equipment in our field house, new main office, and science rooms. Plus, we reevaluated the preventive maintenance schedule of services, the quarterly services that we get in some of our other pieces of equipment, and we actually put out some alternate bids to see what it would take to open up the I think it's about 16 brand boilers we have in School District 158 because they're known to have issues with the brickwork that you get a better look at with the panels pulled off. Although you do every other year for sure because the boiler inspector from the state has to see them and give us certification that they're in satisfactory operating condition. But we like to keep closer monitoring on that. And we find that we've got a real reasonable alternate bid to price from some of our vendors who delivered bids. We've been working with Advantage Mechanical as a part of the present contracts that are expiring in a few weeks right now and have no reason not to recommend them when we analyze base bid, the combination of base bid and alternate bid B. Be happy to answer any questions.
I'm sorry, so it's the base plus the alternate together that drove the decision?
Yes. Yeah,
And to be clear, that's alternate A and B, or just?
Just B only.
Just
base
B
bid and
only.
alternate B. And I apologize, the version you have, I have another version where I actually did the calculation of the combination, and it didn't make this report. My apologies, but there is another bidder who missed some things, and it was a few $100s less. Their bid bond, General Mechanical did not have a bid bond of 10%. They had 5%. That's a big disqualifier in any formal bidding, public bidding process. Plus, they had several of the required attachments missing. You'll see no X's in several of those columns. We treat this as a service contract because that's what it is. So we treat it as a personnel kind of a contract. And it's mostly what it is. There's very little material provided. And so we are recommending that we exclude them because of the missing items. And therefore, Advantage is, it's only a few $100s apart, I believe.
If I may, was there any concern about the alternate bid B? Because of that, to me, that's a rather sizable amount that they came in under.
No, we've done plenty of work with them, and I had a personal visit with the owner of the company.
Okay.
They said we're doing it for that price. So.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Any other questions from the board? Okay. Is there any objection to moving this forward then? All right. We'll go ahead and move that forward. 8.2 construction updates. Anything to highlight on the construction updates?
Yes, two points. One, good news, the tennis courts are substantially complete, and we're receiving beneficial use of the resurfaced tennis courts. We look forward to a long life for them in this new condition. There's some minor adjustments need to be made on some of the fence work, and then we'll consider that closed. And LAMP is diligently working towards final closeout of all the other documentation. I will tell you that we recently convened a higher level committee to begin the process of exploring value to some of the items we didn't finish or didn't include in the project because we were concerned that we couldn't meet budget, but yet we identified them in our preliminary review of needs. Plus, as we took occupancy in our $35 million in round numbers development, actually turned into a $33.8 million development, I believe. And so we found that there are some operational needs that we have. So I take your attention to the very last page of this handout, page 404. And there's a short list there. I apologize. There's one item that didn't make our radar in the preliminary meeting, but I will just say a few words and ask others to speak more. The item that didn't make the list that probably warranted need is there has been some discussion of need for bleacher expansion. I had a rough number done by the installer of the bleachers when he came out to do some punch list work, and I was told that for an additional expansion on the south end of the west bleachers, which are the home bleachers, 196 seat would cost in round numbers about $190,000 we should budget. So it's in round figures, it would be about $1,000 a seat to expand the bleachers in that kind of scale of expansion. Other things operationally that I can speak to briefly, when we opened the new science labs in the West Addition, we found there were some acoustical issues with resonance of noise, sound in those rooms, and also resonance of some of the sound from those rooms to other rooms, like classrooms upstairs that were built on top of some of them, and so forth. So we've been testing a couple of models of how to fix that problem, and we found one that works, and for a little less than $50,000 that can be resolved. There are electrical circuit enhancements that need to take place in those science labs. We've discovered that the operational conditions of those rooms are a little bit different than the other science labs. There's more electric hot plates being plugged in and around the room and so forth, and we would need to run additional electrical distribution and recircuiting into those rooms. We had some preliminary design done. We had the contractor who helped us, the electrical contractor who helped us build the building, do some rough estimates for us, and this number is a realistic number in that neighborhood, what it would cost. We've asked our architect to commence the design process to put that out to bid. A couple of hours ago, I just received an invitation for the 99% complete design package review to put that out to bid. Right now, because we're excessively tripping all the electric circuits in those rooms with the operations to date. Another operational item we've discovered is in the weight rooms, our school district has chose to recess some, I don't know if this is the proper term, it's probably not, the landing pads for the squat racks when you lift the weights up where you stand. They were actually originally purchased as a raised platform, and our former football coach brought good reason to us to consider to recess them in the floor for safety, etc. So we put together a installation. Unfortunately, the care of the floor and moisture and so forth is attacking some of the subfill materials, and we need to reconfigure that. There are a lot of ideas being bandied about how to do that. I don't really have final numbers for you on that one at this time. And from there are some other things on the list that I would prefer to leave maybe for Mr. Rowe to speak to briefly, if he may.
Well, if I could, you can come up, Dr. Rowe. Dr. Rowe.
I'm sorry.
Oh, no, it's okay.
Dr. Rowe.
It's okay. We just a kind of a quick overview, and then we'll let Dr. Rowe get into the little more detail. But what we'd like to do just procedurally is there's some things on here, and really the first three things Doug talked about really do need to be done. I mean, these are things that the first two in the science labs, it's something that we just didn't really realize through design process, but had we, that would have been in the original design. So we have a great science lab facility, and I think for this extra money, we're just gonna complete that out. So I think that's important. I think, as Doug explained, the weight room floor repair is, and we all went in and looked at it ourselves. It really does need to be done. We're just not sure exactly what the fix is yet and what it'll look like, but that does need to be done. And then we get into a few other things. The upgrade of the stadium lighting, and you can talk a little more specific about that. Is we have weak lighting out there. We knew that all along. It's just something that we did not put into the original project cost. But this is not a surprise, and really, can we live with it? Well, we have been, and so we just kind of have to make a decision. Is this now a time to try to address that? And it's just very uneven lighting on the field. The tennis court seating is something that we'd really like to do, and we'd really like to move on this one quickly so it could be done in the fall. It'll just make a really nice seating environment on the other side of the courts, which is the west side. And what it'll be is basically using the earthwork that's there to make a couple of plateaus where people could bring chairs and sit on them. So it's not actual installed seating, but it would be some nice, probably brickwork to level that area off, and would really enhance. Because if you've been to our tennis courts, we're 4 courts deep, and so depending on where the match is being played that you're trying to watch, being able to be on the other side would be very beneficial. And right now, some people do go to the other side, but there's just a hill there, and it would be really good. So that's something, as we got the painting done that Doug talked about, if we get that done, would really, I think, enhance for a low cost, really complete that enhancement. And then the last thing, and something Dr. Robin talked more about, but we've identified through this process that there are some needs in terms of the fine arts wing of the building, and we did not do anything in this upgrade of Huntley High School to the fine arts wing. Again, we had to cut the project off to get it to the cost we wanted. But now that we have a little bit of money, we want to go back and address that. We don't know for sure what that final desire is. We do know there really is a critical need for some more instrument storage space, and that is going to have to be addressed somehow. We've also talked about a potential black box theater. We've talked about different things, but we certainly do not want to make a knee-jerk reaction and bring you a proposal of this is what we want to do. And so we're going to be convening a committee, much like what we did with Huntley 3000, to really look through the fine arts wing, what the needs are, and also do that in conjunction with the Fine Arts Academy that's being developed. Because as you heard, I believe it was in May or June when you got an update on where the new academy development is. The Fine Arts Academy, the hope is that it'll be going next year, and so needs and desires, may be different, may be enhanced because of things that we want to do in that academy. So we want to take a little bit of time and look at that. But procedurally, again, we would like to move forward with the first three items. We'd like to move forward with the tennis court seating. I think the upgrade of stadium lighting is going to take some discussion. I don't think that's a expenditure. I just want to say to you tonight, please, let's go ahead with that. I think we need to have some discussion on that and the fine arts wing. But at the same time, we really want this to be obviously an open process. If there's something that board members are aware of, or as we work through this, that you want to discuss, this really is the time, and it doesn't have to be tonight, but we can bring this item back in the next couple of meetings just to have this discussion. Because I would just close with, I really think we got the renovation addition to Huntley High School right, and a lot of the reason we got it right was we had a good process, and it was a multi-year process that was incredibly collaborative. And there's always a few little things we look at and go, why didn't we do something different? But not really, and nothing big. And the reason is because we had a good process. And so we want to do the same thing here, so that when we really do close this process out in the end, we've really well thought it through. So maybe Dr. Rowe, if you can talk in any more detail about some of those things on the bottom of the list,
Sure.
And any other thoughts you have.
Sure. Now, the summary that you gave of the top three and their necessity is spot on. The points about the stadium lights, that conversation came up during the project. As soon as we finished the football field, and then the scoreboard went in, all of a sudden there was a glaring the need for those lights. And if I remember correctly, Doug, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but at the time we discussed it kind of off the record, discussed, hey, we need this. There are severe shadows at the corners of the end zone, the 10s and the 30s specifically. And LED light technology was not in place then, and Mr. Nkosik believes that that's obviously the way to go. We've invested in our schools, and the longevity and the cost and then the energy consumption is, but that technology was not there. It is now, and it's something that is only going to enhance one of the most, the premier space that we have, but also just in terms of, I don't want to throw the safety word around, but we want our players to be able to see what they're doing and be safe on the field, and obviously our spectators to have a nice experience watching the game as well. And if now that I've mentioned it, pay attention on Friday nights when you come out. You'll notice it if you haven't already. While we're out on the stadium, we'll jump to the.
Can I just say something about stadium lighting,
Sure.
just to help you with that? Roger Schrofer was kind enough and invested a lot of time with me, and we evaluated the stadium lighting when we were in the process of deciding what our priorities were and what we could afford to do. And we measured the stadium lighting as was. We replaced all the lamps and the ballast because those lights have a short life cycle, and they degrade before they fail. So we wanted to see how much light we could really get out of the lighting we have with new lamps. And Roger, I would hope you would agree that I think we met the requirement of 30 foot candles average on the field. The range for a high school football field, I think I was told, is 30 to 50 foot candles. So we're on the average around the field. And there's a whole little engineering process for doing a full photometric layout. And so we're at the bottom of the range with what we have. This number was for putting us at the top of the range. My driver for doing this in LED wasn't as much for energy efficiency because there's not enough runtime hours. It's simply a matter we could direct the lighting to get more uniform lighting and get us up to the top of the range of 50 foot candles at this price.
Thanks. So then back to the stadium, Mr. Troy actually brought it up to me about the band not having a place to sit, and they stand down by the student section and they continue to entertain during the game and help with the energy in the stadium, and a place for them in the stands. In addition to, if you look at Raider Nation, and we're squeezing 800 plus kids into a section that's meant for about 6. It's very, very crowded, and that overflow with the additional 196, if we even could look at a little bit more, would allow for the student section to expand on the south end as well as the band. The specs that Mr. Rinkosik researched were deeper foot area, so that not only could the band members be in the stadium, but also their instruments, so they could continue to entertain and energize the student section as well as our guests. I think that's something that that we all recognize is a necessity. We talk about it regularly. Every Friday night it comes up. We're squeezed in pretty tight, which is an awesome thing. And the fall season around the high school is a very special place to be because of that. And then as for the potential with fine arts, band storage has been a need for some time. The arrival of Mr. Carter only amplified that as our band program has grown, has improved. Our numbers have gone up. I think they increased by over 20% from last year to this year, just with the success that they had. You've invested in us already, which we're greatly appreciative with the purchase of new uniforms and the purchase of some additional equipment that we needed at the end of the year. They look fantastic, and the kids are excited. I have alumni that come back like, "Hey, you got everything after I left," but they look fantastic. They do. So that partnered with. We want to make we're an inclusive environment. We want to be sure that they feel welcome. But then with the band storage, that was already an issue for us. And then orchestra is just a year away. Next year we'll have orchestra at the high school, which brings larger instruments, and we have a plan for that. However, it's more of a makeshift plan than a permanent great solution. We're adding more lockers to the hallways right outside of the band hallway. So it works, but I think long term there is a storage problem in that area of the building. With that, we did investigate a black box. We have our musicals and our theater program is growing. We had a big uptick in interest in traditional theater, and especially with some of the Shakespearean plays that Mrs. DeFrancesco has put on. They just had a all Shakespearean fundraiser this past weekend that did really, really well, and these kids we're seeing that interest go up. 5 years ago when I arrived, I heard regularly that we're a sports school and all we care about are athletics. And I don't believe that to be true. I don't believe it ever was true, but I don't hear it as much now because our fine arts programs are commanding so much more attention because of the quality of performances, the use of social media. Kids are seeing what they're doing instead of just their small clique performing for each other. Our attendance is up. The money that's coming in for their performances is helping sustain and grow, which is a very positive thing. But I also see the need and how jam-packed the PAC is every single week to every single weekend, from our performances to the middle school performances to some of the community things. Lori and Nathan, the spring meeting is really no joke. It is a knockdown, drag-out for space and time in the PAC. Our growing dance program, can find some possibility for space and class time in the black box. So it's something worth looking into. But like Dr. Berkey said, we don't know what we don't know. And with this Fine Arts Academy, we have new courses coming. We have a whole scale of a really quality plan coming together for how we're going to be able to allow our students to immerse themselves in the arts that they love so much. So I think that the approach of what do we need, if you had all the money in the world, what would it be, and then give it a dose of reality once we see what that is, it would be a healthy exercise for us to undergo. Any questions about anything?
So I think what we really need to do, obviously the items that are over over the amount that we'll have to bid out, you would have to approve those as they come. And again, I would like your nod to be able to work with those first couple of things. But also maybe if we could have a little discussion about the board about process-wise, how would you like to go about this? Is there more information you need about anything we presented here tonight? Again, we'll be coming back to you in the future about the fine arts part. We don't have a recommendation for you on that tonight. And kind of procedurally, how do you want to go about this? And how do you feel about this? I think that's kind of what we're looking for tonight, was kind of an open discussion on this.
I guess my main question overall is kind of from a delineation of time. It sounds like the first 3 would be kind of immediate if that's the right thinking of it. But like, how long would that take, and how long is it between that point in time and some of these TBDs being more fleshed out?
I think if I can jump in there are actionable items at the top, and help me, Doug, is theoretically we have a proposed timeline for when the electrical can be done during this school year. It's a month's worth of work to pull all the wires and do all the installations, obviously working around when the classes are being used. As for the weight room floor, that's something that Lamp believes can happen over winter break if we're able to move forward. And then the third being the ceiling tiles. I don't have a specific timeline on that one. I think
I'm very close to finalizing a potential procurement process for that right now, as of this morning. And what it's going to be is that it's going to take about 5 or 6 working days, and it would be reasonable to think that would be done by the end of winter break, along with the electrical work.
And then the work on the hill by the tennis courts could be done before the ground freezes.
Okay.
And the weight room floor, as long as we come up with a solution that's a good long-term permanent solution, it could be done winter break, but we're not there yet.
Right.
Okay. And then as far as dimensioning fine arts needs, academy needs, that type of thing,
we can go as fast as we need to go in terms of getting the group together. We've updated our new fine arts department chair on the totality of the academy plan, as she is going to play a major role in terms of overseeing that once we hand off to her leadership. So she's knee deep in that right now, but then in the next week or so we'll be pulling together all of our art and music and theater folks to have that initial discussion of what should be on the table, and then set a series of meetings to conclude.
I think it's going to take
us.
I think it's going to take a semester, at least. I think that it's more important to get this right than speed on the fine arts part. So I think it's going to be a process. So I wouldn't expect bringing anything back to you probably December at the earliest, if not even after that point on the fine arts part.
But I'm sorry, I want to make sure I understood what you said earlier. With the orchestra coming next year, you have a makeshift plan in place so we can accommodate the program and the instruments and
That's
all
correct.
of the stuff. So as far as the speed component of this, there is no urgency, super urgency,
Correct.
in order to get this done by next school year. However, understood that there is a critical need here, and I've seen it. I have two kids that are in that music program or in that band room all the time, so I get it. I've seen it.
It's pretty critical, but I guess the caveat I would have is I'm really reluctant to go, say to Roger, our architect, go design some storage. We need this for the fall. I want to get this going, and then we go and look at the bigger picture, and we go, oh, the storage should have been somewhere else, and so that's what I mean by that. I mean, I think that storage is going to be a challenge next fall. Doug's probably not going to like any of the storage where things get stored, but that's just things we may have to deal with in the fall. And it doesn't mean if we don't have something ready by December, there can't be something open in the fall, but that's kind of the balance.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that to say, okay, the makeshift plan should be the longer-term plan, not just a one-year thing. I understand that there's a balance. I totally get it.
I'd say the
like I said,
desire,
I've seen it.
yes, but the necessity is we've got some time.
Sure.
Yeah, if I may, the idea of the band storage, if it would rush into movement ahead of, if there's a possibility of a black box or some other kind of space being built, the economies of scale of building the other space and just tagging on the storage would make the unit cost of the storage space much more economical. So it'd be a good move to kind of hang in there and well plan the entire process for all of that together.
Roger, could we ask Roger to come up? I just want to make sure, Roger is here, and Roger has been has been part of all these discussions, and don't know if you have any comments on any of this, or certainly like if we were, for example, wanting to have band storage built by the fall, what kind of timeline that has to be bid out by to complete that. I'm going to assume that's in the winter at some point.
Yeah, basically, even just doing a small storage room, there's still a sequence of things that have to happen. You have to do footings and foundations before you can build walls and things like that. So you're looking at at least a 6-month construction process just to build a simple storage addition.
Yeah, the bottom line is we're not renovating existing space, we're building new space, and therefore it's a structure being built.
Potentially, yes.
And we really don't want part of that 6 months to be winter if we can afford it, because it'll cost more and it won't be as good with quality construction.
Yep.
Yeah. And that's a probably on the building new space. I mean, I think, like anything, we're going to think out of the box and look at the existing space in that wing, and maybe ideas will come forward that, will be more renovation. We just don't know, I think, as we just haven't really, we haven't really dove into that yet.
Well, here's my view of this whole list, and the problem I'm having is this TBD for the fine arts wing. It seems like that's not an insignificant number. Probably a big number. It's probably a pretty big number compared to these other numbers that are out here. And to look at wants and needs and priorities without even having an order of magnitude of what that number is, it's really hard for me to kind of figure out how to go about this. It's sort of like saying, hey, we're going to have, a new garage. We need a garage, we need storage, we need a driveway, and the TBD item is the Corvette. It's like, that could dwarf everything else on the list. So I think we need all this. It's hard to make any decisions without knowing it at all what that number looks like.
Well, I think kind of what we're saying administratively is we really do feel the first 3 things on there really need to be addressed, and we know we have the money in the project to do that. There's TBD just to be clarified, there's TBD on the weight room floor, because as Doug said, we don't know what the fix is going to be, but it is going to involve cutting into part of the floor at various parts, and I really hate to throw a number out there, but it could be somewhere between a $50,000 and a $75,000 number.
Right,
and
but
again,
on
that's
the order
really
of
rough.
magnitude, it's not the same as the storage for fine arts, though. That's the clarification there.
I can put a pretty good range on.
Well, and I would tell you, why on that one that's really more of a repair, why don't you just put that, why is that in this budget? It should just go in our regular O&M repairs budget, and I see the reason for the others staying in this, but I wouldn't put the weight room.
Well, how we code it, we can determine that.
Yeah, but I say this because Mike's he's looking at this remaining budget and looking at these items. That's how he's trying to frame it. And I'm going, well, at least take one of these items out of the equation, because it really doesn't need to be in this specific budget.
And I agree with that.
I kind of disagree, though, in terms of we built it and effectively decided it was built wrong, and then built it again, and now it's broken.
Yeah, but at some point it becomes maintenance. It's an ongoing structure. It's in place.
And it's been there for several years.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's,
this-
I understand the logic there, but at some point we say it's built, now it's part of the ongoing maintenance of the district.
Well, was the tennis court a maintenance issue?
That is small enough where I'm either way on it.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say I'm in favor of it. but
Well, that particular
that's-
item was deemed to be a flaw and was substantially funded without the district's involvement. It's been made
No,
part of
but
that.
I think he's talking about the
Concept,
seating. You're talking about the seating, right?
No.
What's on
no.
here, or?
No, I'm saying the tennis court repair was, in my mind, it was a fix of the initial construction. And I think the weight room kind of falls, in my mind, in that same category. It's a fix of the original construction.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
I don't agree with it, but I see what you're saying.
Well, it's just that weight room, whether it's on here or not, you can kind of get it, like Dr. Berkey said, you sort of got a good idea of what that number is. This other one could be equal to all of those numbers put together. And it's really hard to evaluate anything with that unknown variable out there. I think, and don't get me wrong, I think all of this is definitely a priority. It's just how can we make any decisions at all with that being out there?
Well, I mean, what I would, I'm sorry, what I would tell you is, it just tells me that, I mean, I think you do it. I think you can go ahead and do it, but you just know that your budget is limited to about $1 million for the fine arts wing is what it tells you. You can make that decision. You just got to know that's your limitation.
It is our limitation, but I also want to, remind you, whenever we identify what these fine arts needs are, et cetera, we do have the reserve for replacement fund.
No, and
so, I mean,
I don't disagree with
yeah,
that.
so I mean, it's not necessarily, for this project, that's what we have, which is why, we felt that the lab things are, I mean, completely directly tied to this project. That's why I think it really makes sense to definitely code that to the project. But I think the fine arts thing, we have to wait and see what comes in, I think.
The other important thing is you don't want to, at this point at least, eliminate the thinking out of the box, the pun black box at this point in time. You just like Huntley 3000, they spent a lot of time, where is it going? What's the future? What's the order of magnitude? You could also look at this, somewhat of, we're trying to create a master plan for the fine arts program, whether it's all built day one or not. At least it's master planned for the future.
Dr. Berkey asked earlier about the process. I think it's a good approach to take in the similar vein that Huntley 3000 was done, where you do put all your cards on the table and you say, these are what our wants are, and then you start scaling back from there. And to me, you've got a number here with the net final balance projected, so you've got a target dollar amount. Is it going to come in less? Yeah, it might very well. To me, it is kind of spelled out, and there is a limitation here. And process-wise, I like the way that all worked out. My only curiosity is, and I'm guessing it's going to be scaled back time-wise, because the Huntley 3000 project was a very long-term project, but it was a very big project as well. This is much smaller in scale, so it should take less time to put those pieces together to understand the wants and needs, and then go ahead and start drafting, the facility that will meet those needs and possibly exceed, or most efficiently address. Maybe that's the best way to put it.
I mean, really what you're gathering here is our opinion and our desire in what direction. Just a couple of questions on that. And I know this is going to come across as maybe a little cold, I'm sorry, but how are we $100,000 off on the electrical needs of a science room we knew we were building?
It's a good question. I don't know that I have the answer for it. I think that Doug, you need to help me with some of the specifics. But what happened?
The hot plates in the old science rooms, the old science rooms being the west two-story addition, were 8 amp. The new hot plates that are being used are 13.3 amps. And from what my team's informal observations, they have more of them. And we have cord reels in the middle of the rooms that were initially visioned to serve those. They cannot serve a 13.3 amp hot plate, nor can they serve one 8 amp on every one because they're not separately circuited. So the fix is we have to take, and actually the science program has also in their use of the space has identified that these hot plates could be better served on the perimeter walls. But we would have to make every outlet along every workstation on the perimeter walls a separate circuit, which means we have to run more electrical power to the area, put another electrical distribution panel on each floor, and they have to re-pull a bunch of wires to every circuit that's already there. In addition, what they found was the cord reels that are positioned in each of the labs, there are 8 of them, and those 8 are not spaced out conducive to how they like to operate in the room with the flexible tables they have on wheels in those spaces, and we need to spread them out. So we have to do a little movement on those existing cord reels, and that kind of work is estimated to cost up to that much. It would go out to bid, and we might be surprised and it comes in a lot less. We'll have to see what the bidding climate would be, but that's like the worst case scenario right now.
Yeah, I'd like to hear a little more on that, because I mean, it's just.
Your point, Bill, you haven't addressed the point of why wasn't that caught in the initial design?
Yeah, and I understand if we've got new equipment that's 13 amp as opposed to the older 8 amp, can we just go and buy more 8 amp ones? Do we have to rewire?
I still don't think we're going to have the circuitry capacity in the room because we have more of them in each room.
But didn't we know?
But we knew we were going to have more of them.
Okay. I can't answer that part.
All right. I'll let that go. But yeah, I mean, it's obviously a safety issue, and I think anytime we're dealing with electrical or things like that, definitely a top priority, and I would put that at the top of the priority list. I've heard for years about storage of the band equipment. I've also heard issues about transportation of the band equipment, especially for competitions and things like that. The addition of orchestra. I find it hard to believe it's only the 6th or 7th highest on the list. I think it's probably a higher item on the list, and I would probably suggest that we consider that from a prioritization perspective to move that up the list. I think it's more important. And again, to what you say in terms of, we're not a sports school. This is truly, the students vote with their feet, and their feet are saying we want to get involved in music, we want to get involved in performances and in band and things like that, and I think we need to support that. So for that reason, I would definitely move that up.
I just want to be clear. This is not a ranked list. I mean, that's not what this is.
No, but what I'm saying is, if some of these other
Right.
items like stadium lighting or tennis courts, we can take that money and defer it to the storage, I would rather do that. So giving you my kind of thought process on that.
Yeah, the first 3 things I definitely classify as a priority of this list. So it is ranked in that respect. The first 3 things I think are.
And I would agree with Mr. Quagliano that number 3 there shouldn't even be on the list. So we can do that under maintenance.
Okay.
And finally, anything we can do to improve the seating in the stadium, I think, is a high priority. I would even challenge us to see what we can do in terms of seating for potential graduations, and accommodating more seating in the stadium. We can look at tens of thousands of dollars of savings of not having to pay a contract to, an NIU or someone else. So it's an out-of-the-box kind of thinking, but it's not like, other schools aren't doing it, and we have a beautiful facility in which to do it. So maybe an investment to that direction will help. So, my opinion.
We would have to add 4,000.
We're talking about thousands.
I know.
So 7,000
I know.
people come
I know.
to graduation. Okay.
Well, maybe it's a fund to rent. Maybe it's a fund to install them temporarily for those events, and the money is for that reason. But again,
you're talking Texas-sized football stadium at that point. Texas high school football.
so I mean, if we're looking at adding additional seating for the band to sit during the games, if we're looking to do that, this is the perfect time to consider something like that. And it's feedback that I get from the community. So. Your committee still.
Okay, any additional, anything else comment-wise? Do you have enough to go on from here?
I need just a little bit of direction on something. Within the next couple of days, I am prepared to take the first two that, although not a priority, but those first two items, the acoustical treatment and electrical circuit enhancement, and begin some serious procurement, wheels turning. And I want to get a sense of, do I have the marching orders to proceed with those two?
It sounds like it. I don't hear an objection necessarily.
Correct.
If I'm interpreting it, everybody's.
Yeah, it needs to be done.
It's not a vote. Just for the record, this is not a vote.
There'll be a board meeting, we'll approve a
That's an
bid, or
important
approve
direction,
purchase
yes.
orders or
Right.
things like that.
I don't hear a voice to the contrary. So I think that's pretty clear direction. Correct?
Yeah.
Do you have enough?
And then,
Oh, one other thing I would say, the stadium lighting, there was a beautiful over-the-shoulder catch. Was that Michael Boland, I think, in the corner of the end zone? That would suggest the lighting is pretty good, so.
It's better there than the center.
What's that?
Yeah. But he
It's
dropped
better
it
in the
on
corner than in the
30,
center
so
of the end zone.
That's where the.
but then I have the same question on the tennis court seating. Are we okay to move forward on that this fall?
I'm not.
Committee vote?
Aye.
Committee? No, taking first direction from the committee, but please weigh in accordingly, because they need to know too.
Well, we're not voting on, I mean, this is, like you said, it's not a vote, so it's a direction to move forward and to inquire into it, correct? I mean,
What this project really is it's earthwork, and it's going to be buying stone. I mean, this is a project I believe that isn't going to have to be bid in that.
Neither will the acoustical treatment.
Yeah.
I'll buy the material and we'll outsource the services, and it'll just be purchase orders.
Yeah, so I mean, they're really, with the tennis courts, we'd need to know if you're okay or not. Because that probably will not have to come back as an actual vote.
Yeah, for something like this, I could see this coming out of the regular O&M budget.
And, as far as the estimate goes, I'm not, you guys do this for a living, and so far better, but, I mean, is it all graded? Don't we have to go through surveys and all that kind of stuff, and not just lay brick?
Roger, can you talk about exactly what it is? Because Roger did
Because if the
draw
drainage
something.
is changed with plateaus for seating and that, somebody's going to be concerned about that.
Well, it's basically a hillside. So what you're doing is you're carving out notches into the hillside and building retaining walls out of modular pieces of brick. So the drainage won't really be changed. The overall elevations will be changed, it'll just be tiered.
The flat surface will not be different. It will be turf, so it'll still absorb, permeate water, so we don't have a stormwater issue revision there. It's just, there'll be some retaining
So we
walls that
wouldn't
are not.
be putting the courts at risk by changing the sloping or anything there.
No, you will not.
And is that slope as it currently exists being used
That is correct.
by people to, lay down blankets or chairs and watch the game? So it is currently being used.
By some. By some, not to the fullest extent of what it could be, but by some, yes.
You can't really put a chair on it.
No, you can't. Yes, it would be risky. If you drive through Del Webb on Del Webb Boulevard, how they have their tennis courts, those two grass steps is very similar to what we're designing.
I mean, my initial thought personally is it feels like a pretty incidental number in the scheme of things, and it does some good. And as I say that, I don't know where that materiality threshold where it becomes too big, but in my mind, I wouldn't be opposed to putting it out to bid and scoping it further.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with it. Again, by an order of magnitude wise, I don't have a problem with this.
I just want you to know that I don't think it warrants bidding. It will be a couple of trades that would be hired, and their expenses would be very small. Actually, the expense of bidding on these things is not a good investment of money anyway.
Tony, do you want to weigh in on the tennis thing?
Again, when it's of a lesser magnitude that it is, I'm just going to just make this an O&M project.
Yeah. Coding wise, we can leave it to them. It's just a matter of do we pursue the work.
Am I okay with doing it? I'm okay with doing it. I don't have a major, I'm not.
I concur with Tony.
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm okay with doing it. I'm not really sure. On the one hand, I'm hearing, well, it's not that big of a deal. Well, then why is it even here? So I'm okay with doing it, and let's move on.
Yeah.
Okay. Does that give you enough to work with? Okay. Thank you, gentlemen. Anything else on the high school updates before we move forward? Okay. Moving onward, item 8.3, change order for All-American Exterior.
Thank you. The Martin School and Cheswick School roof replacement repairs project is substantially complete. There's a very small punch list. All the surprises that could be uncovered have already been uncovered, so it's a good time to reconcile. We did fix our inadequate ventilation in those roof attics now, and so we should be good for a long, long time. And the good news is we have a net cost reduction that's noticeable as we reconcile our allowance against the unit price work and are bringing to a deductive change order that's on the project. Looking for your approval. It's all based on, not all, but the substantial lion's share of the investment is all based on the allowances in the bid and unit prices that were in the bid for the roof deck replacement, and actually they didn't track any need to re-nail any deck over there. They admitted that they probably did a little and didn't notify us to verify the quantities, so they weren't bringing forward any request for additional funds for that.
So by approving this change order, they will deduct this amount from the overall project?
That is correct.
Okay.
Let's not delay.
Any questions from
Is
the
it a
board?
trick question? Okay. Yeah, okay.
No questions? Yes, thank you. There's your 28,000. There's your tennis court issue. Any objections with moving this forward then? Any questions from the board as well? All right, we'll go ahead and move that forward. Item 8.4, O&M deferred maintenance.
Okay. All our large projects from the summer of 2017 are substantially complete. We're focusing on the smaller projects to work on through the fiscal year. Our 10-year life safety remedial measures are 99% complete. We're waiting for a couple doors to be delivered, and then we're going to call our architect and tell them we're done, and please come out and verify so we can notify the state. I have met with two other newer parties on the solar energy opportunities, so discussion continues. I've told that tomorrow is the runoff for REX credits that are the incentive dollars that would make something like that viable, so we're not ready for that. There's most likely one in the spring, but a date's not been announced, and discussion continues. I think that's about the fourth or fifth party I've talked to now. There is discussion on, do we want to own it? Do we want to just lease our land and let the utility have it and get our electricity at a penny a kilowatt hour cheaper in Bologna? But it's nothing concrete yet on return on investments if we own, so nothing to talk about. Lead testing is probably going to happen later this month. We're sampling.
Doug, are you on the deferred maintenance?
Oh, sorry, I'm on the O&M updates. I'm out of order. I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
Oh, my. This is a report that I've done a number of years in a row now for you. And on page 2, you'll find in the report the categorical summary of over a 10-year look, how much should the district invest in what kind of replacement, capital replacement to preserve our District 158 infrastructure to status quo, the present condition of the facilities. It's a living document. Then if I can take your attention to page 8 in the report, this is where it's sorted by fiscal year. The first thing I want to take your attention to is beyond looking at fiscal year 19 right now. In my mind, all we have is a tool to look at what we should budget annually to keep the buildings up. And as I say, it's a living document. Every year we visit where have our repair expenses be. This is all predictive failure on things based on standards in the industry for what expected equipment life is. But weather conditions, first construction quality, operation, run times and things all change the actual end of life for the equipment. So it is a regularly evolving document. But I will tell you that right now we're experiencing escalation and failures on the Marlowe and Heinemann roof. The Conley-McCabe roof have their own issues. I'd like to just touch on them briefly, what they are. Our middle schools have a single-ply rubber roof. It's called EPDM. And underneath that, there is what's been estimated in value on, I think it's each of those buildings is to the tune of about $1 million. And I know they're different sizes, so this is just a round number. $1 million of insulation. And underneath that, there is a plastic vapor barrier. And what we found is we've been doing an infrared scan each summer where we can find out how much water is getting through the rubber membrane on the top and getting into the insulation and just trapped in the insulation between the top of the roof and the vapor barrier underneath. And the reason we have to do that is because since we have that bottom layer, we don't know the water is actually getting through the roof membrane, attacking the insulation. And when it does that, we lose our thermal barrier, plus it starts to degrade and then causes stress on the roof as a whole. And so we have to replace it. Our repair cost for the Heinemann roof, I just got a new update because I asked them to proceed further. They found additional moisture. They did the infrared scan, started to cut the roof open, and found that deep underneath in the layers of insulation, and there are many in order that you have to taper, and some places it's a lot thicker than others and things, so you can't really see, you see what's near the top and not the bottom. And they found more. Right now we're up to the tune of $48,000 invested in replacing insulation on Heinemann in the last 12 months. At Marlowe, we're at about $12,000. And if we would put a restorative coating on top of that rubber roof right now, it's a liquid applied membrane system with a 20-year life as we did at the high school, we could protect that investment of the insulation. Plus, we could then protect our thermal barrier in those buildings. On the Conley and the McCabe roof, what we're finding now is that we're starting to experience, because of the typical scenario that we have a storm with a large wind and it blows the shingles off the roof and it pops nails on the shingles and the shingles are cracking because we have inadequate ventilation in the roof to relieve the pressures that build up, the aerodynamic phenomenons that want to push those shingle up when wind blows over the earth over those buildings, just like an airplane wing. What's happening then is moisture's getting in and it's attacking the plywood deck, and so we're starting to replace plywood deck. And so, you know, once again, it's shingled roofs, the investment isn't significant, but it's recognizably escalating. Conley, we did a track and we only spent $1,610. At McCabe, we spent $5,000, and part of that $5,000 was $2,400 worth of work in June of this year. I mean, it's really starting to pick up speed. And it's our recommendation to maybe put together design bid specifications. And if you may not remember, our financial investment with the model we have with our consultant, who only doesn't really get reimbursed any additional money unless some alternative products are used. Then what is the one of the allowable ones in the spec that he represents? He does all the design for free, and I get some additional expenses from our regular architect to assist us with the peer review and building permitting. we don't have a lot of financial risk by putting them out to bid soon. What we could do is say that the bids are good for an extended period of time and choose not to award them till maybe all of them, if we choose that we don't want to, if something happens financially. We could choose to delay awarding the bids till as late as when the first budget presentation is made next late winter, early spring. And so that's part of a large project model that I've presented a vision of. I actually mapped out some expenses because these large projects, the other one that's on there is asphalt replacement. We continue to have, we have over 3.3 million square feet of asphalt in District 158, and we still have a lot of it that's very much aged and needs attention, and we do spend a lot of time putting patches in, but we'd like to focus and recommend that we continue to focus on keeping some long-term solutions in place there as well. And so we've got some projects targeted, if you look on that page 8, and I've mapped out those large projects would start right after the last day of school in June. They would start, and so there are some expenses that would map out to the month of June. And then there would be some expenses that would map out to the fiscal year 19. So I've tracked those expenses, and I will tell you that the numbers I put in my little capital project spending plan chart there on page 8 had a budget of 2.4 for fiscal year 18, and it's an old number. Mr. Altmeier's presentation tonight is more like 2.9, so there's an additional 500 there. That's available and it is a cushion for how those things develop. We would again look on the asphalt project to visit our traffic conditions and have our traffic engineer invited. If we're going to make that kind of substantial investment in asphalt replacement, we want to make sure that we're building something that better serves our operational needs on the front of traffic flow on the property as well. So that would be part of the process. Once again, you can go to page 9 and you can see all the details of all the other lesser scale items on there just for the year. But what my goal is, as it has been last year, is to ask the board for just a general consensus that they support the idea of commencing the design development phase on the projects that I have this capital project spending plan out here for. And what we would do, if there's a general consensus that that's reasonable, is to get them out there, and then the board would get to visit them and formally approve them as bid projects in the near future. And then again, next spring, when the financial outlook for 19 develops further beyond the 5-year plan that Mr. Altmaier presented last, we would bring back, in addition to this project model for life cycle, we would bring the administrative request for added value items and revisit the whole report over again.
Okay, there's a lot to wrap
there's a lot
around there.
There's a lot, and again, these roofs and the large volume costs are just really an Achilles heel of just spending a lot of money.
Oh yes,
it's really starting to bug me here.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one thing about that, Tony, because it's been bugging me too, and I think it's a symptom of we built a lot real fast too.
Yeah, and they're all built around the same time, so they're all failing around the same time, but also concerns me about fixing them all at the same time, which means 15 years from now you're going to have the same round of large costs come back up again.
I'm sorry, Tony. I'm going to suggest to you not, because we are not rebuilding, restoring roofs right now, any way, shape, or form near what we did before. We're putting a higher quality product.
Right.
In fact, in the middle schools, the next phase of replacement that will happen will be 20 years from now, and I'll probably be with a cane walking in if I visit you here.
Right.
But
I think you're right.
It will be a much lesser cost, Tony, and we may not even need it by then. It's a pretty good. The middle schools, it's also a much longer. It's a 30-year roof, So these things are not going to all fail at the same time again, I don't believe, but I understand your concern, appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's, so, I mean, my concern is, do you end up doing these all close to each other, or spread it out a little bit so that ultimately, whether it's 15, 20, 30 years from now, they're spread out a little bit. So the other thing I'll say, so if I'm catching this right, like on your fiscal year report, you have, I think it's Marlowe. Yep. So you showed Marlowe as a fiscal year 19, but you proposed to it looks like proposed to do this in 2 steps. Is that what I see?
Well,
or is it just,
yeah, I call it a fiscal year 19
Or is
report.
it just consuming funds in 2 separate fiscal years, but it would all get done
Yeah,
at once?
that's
Okay.
always been
All
a
right.
challenge with
Yeah.
this
All right.
capital
I get it.
project business, because we use the summer 10 to 12 week period, and unfortunately it's in 2 fiscal years.
Yeah, no, and that's not a problem. I mean, financially that works. That's not a problem. I just wanted to make sure I understood the process.
So I'll take the extra step here to Tony's point. Is there an alternative to shingling these roofs? Or has that become a more expensive proposal?
I've had a lot of discussion in the last 10 years with people in the business on alternatives, and what I believe it was it's like a 50-year fix, was to put a metal roof on it. And if you drive around the state of Wisconsin, you'll see many public schools with metal roofs.
Yep.
We actually bid, when we did Chesapeake, we bid the alternative. It was more than double the cost. The return on investment it was ridiculous.
Okay.
Just wasn't there.
Well, at least the question's asked now, so. Because if these shingles keep flying off the way that they have been, and I'm guessing that they won't with the next re-roof, but.
We proved it. Chesapeake's been in existence for 2 years, and it hasn't had a blip. There's a masonry wall issue that we're, just one little issue that we're yet left. We fixed a couple of them this summer with the bidding of masonry repairs, but there's not a roof issue there right now, and we don't foresee one for a long time.
Okay.
But we're fixing them to a lot better condition.
Thank you. Other questions? Questions, concerns? All right. If there's nothing else to add, we'll just keep moving on then.
Then I'm going to, if I understand, it would be seem reasonable to get these things designed and out to bid, and then we can talk about them again?
Yes.
Very good.
One question for Mr. Altmeyer. Help my memory a little bit. What is, or Mr. Renkosek, what's in the deferred projects? How much money has been set aside for these kinds of projects?
If you actually look on page 8 in my map, the far right columns, there's some budget support summary. There's actually 4 target account numbers that are that. I'm sorry, Mark, but.
No, you're good. Okay. Thank you. Because the next several years are looking at millions and millions year on year, right? 5 in FY19, another 5 million or 6 million after that.
I mean, on the average, we should be looking at 3.5. This, every year we'll visit it and say, well, we'll just buy more cold patch, or we'll do whatever, or maybe the chillers won't, or the rooftop units can go another couple years, and we'll, keep kicking the can down the road a little bit, so to speak.
Yeah, we did that a couple years ago. Understood. Okay. If there's nothing further, we'll go ahead and move on to item 8.5. This is the change order number 2 with L. Marshall.
Once again, we tracked roof deck replacement and replacing some wet insulation, nailing some of the deck, and some minor adjustments. And we compared that to our allowances that were in the bid, and at the end of the day, we deserve a credit against the allowance in the project of $4,615.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions on the change order to deduct? Or get? Okay. Yes. Just making sure. So any opposition with moving this forward then? Okay. That brings us to the O&M updates that you had already begun.
Yeah, it's the second run, sorry.
That's okay.
I'll try.
Yes.
Where was I? Okay. I think I stopped at lead testing. That'll happen in the near future. We had retro commissioning reports delivered to the O&M department. We had several meetings reviewing the preliminary reports with the auditor hired by the State Illinois Energy Now program to look at Chesapeake and Conley Elementary. I had brought to you McCabe and Martin a few years ago, a few months ago, pardon me. Seems like years with the summer construction season. But the good news is they couldn't find much, and these are our worst performers. So it tells me that we've passed the test, that someone agrees that we're doing, on energy conservation, we're doing a pretty good job. I'll take your attention on Chesapeake to page 45 of this agenda item. There's a little bit of a unresolved matter here. These items for Chesapeake, when we agreed to do a retro commissioning, as we did a number of years ago on McCabe, that kick-started the whole process that followed of our journey to try to implement a lot of energy conservation measures and try to save the school district some money to put in a better place. We agreed that we would spend about $10,000, and we agreed that we would spend it for energy conservation measures that would have a return on investment of no more than 1.25 years. And that is what the agent of the Illinois Energy Now program told us. When they delivered this report in Table 1 here on page 45, our team evaluated X number one, and said that you're wrong, it's not going to cost $7,400. It's going to cost a lot more because there has to be revised piping to protect the operation of the chiller, more controls added. We explained to the engineer a little bit about what would be required. They evaluated it, concurred. They've come back in the last few days and told us it would cost, in their best engineer's estimate, $14,900. We're still a bit skeptical that it can be done for that price. But they told us that we have to do this. And the return on investment would be 14 to 15 years. And we told them that was unreasonable and didn't fit the model. And so we're debating that with them. And they are meeting with the powers that be in the Illinois Energy Now program to determine if it can be removed from this table, because if anything on this table, we have to make a commitment to complete by March 30th of 2018. And I told them that it didn't seem quite palatable. We were looking at an investment of no more than $10,000, return on investment of 1.25 years. So they're evaluating that. As far as number two, that's actually been implemented a couple months ago. What that is our computerized HVAC control system uses monitoring of the performance of the building as it heats and cools and compares to the outside air temperature, and determines that the operating set point temperatures in the building are adequate, that we can start to shut down the HVAC a little bit earlier than the end of the day, and we can coast through the end of the day and maintain occupancy set point temperatures. Like I say, we've done that a couple months ago. Haven't heard anything, Dr. Zayas or Cheryl, Mrs. Powles, from your team telling us it was unreasonably uncomfortable in there towards the last bill of the day to date. On page 131, which I lost my place on all my fumbling, I'm sorry to tell you, but 131 in the report, I would take your attention to is the Conley summary of energy conservation measures, which is even simpler. The auditor that was looking at our electronic scheduling was looking at some schedules that were just some kind of, we don't really know, because that's not what he saw was not our normal operating schedule. So that's been fixed for our handler too, because we adjusted as the operational needs adjust of the facility occupied hours. Number two is again that optimum stop function, and that's all they could find. So that tells me we're doing a pretty darn good job. I'll bring you some more information next month on our that tells another tale about how good we're doing with our recent annual demand load reduction test that we did on August 29th. And that tells a tale that we are doing a good job with that. The last thing I'd bring the board's attention is that on the very last page of this 169-page document is a summary of the grant dollars that the O&M department pulled in to support all our energy conservation and efficient construction in the district last year. We brought in a little over $277,000. And I'll be happy to answer any other questions.
All right. Any questions on the O&M updates or energy conservation? Thank you very much for that presentation. I'll turn it over to Mr. Giselle for item 9.
All right, Board of Education, real quick.
Yeah, we have the minutes on here, but before we get to the minutes, we have something very important we need to address in the room tonight. It is September 7th, I believe. Is that right? 7th? Yes. And that's a very important day. For some people, September 6th is an important day. But for others of us, September 7th is a very important day. We have a birthday among us. And we have our very own Julie Stock's birthday is today. Happy birthday. And so we thought we should sing happy birthday to you because we're such accomplished singers. And please excuse Mr. Litchfield if he doesn't sing along. We believe his mouth is wired shut, so which may not be all bad for a while. So, wow, sorry, I had to do that. So anyway, happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, happy birthday, dear Julie, happy birthday to you. Yeah. Thank you.
A board meeting first in my tenure. Yeah. Don't recall.
I approve that birthday song. All right. Okay, we have a few minutes. Any questions about the minutes? Just if you could take a look at the regular meeting for 8/7/17, just some of the spelling in there. Nothing materially wrong. Okay, anything else? Move that forward. Okay, then I'll make a motion to go into closed session for the items listed on the agenda at 8:13 p.m. Second. We have a motion and a second from Mr. Fleck. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Melendi? Yes. Mr. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Drizel?
Yes.
Mr. Guerin? Mr. Troy?
Yes.
Mr. Fleck?
Yes.
Mr. Quagliano?
Yes. All right, motion carries.
What can I give in? Okay, the least harmful.
Oh, Snickers.
Snickers
It's
least
a
harmful.
protein kit.
All right.
We'll go with that.
Sure, there's some in there with all that other stuff.
Yeah.